Hello and welcome to video number 4 in my series about the City School District of Rochester and the proposed draft budget for the 2020-21 school year. My name is Paul Conroe and I'm doing a series. This is video number 4, Busing Across the City versus Neighborhood Schools. Let's jump right in and get started. So I want to start with a quick little story. Imagine in the city of Rochester that there are 12 children living through 6 houses, all on the same street, and those 12 children attend 12 different RCSD or charter schools, and they're all elementary school kids. And the crazy thing is, it's possible in this school district and in this school climate that they are picked up by 12 different buses. So, to me, that is a problem. 12 buses picking up 12 kids all on the same street. And this happens all across the city on every school day. So, here's my main point. In a $950 million budget, transportation is an $80 million expense. And some or much of that is in what I would call a luxury expenditure that we can't afford in this budget season. Now, let's look at it from a positive side. Let's go to neighborhood schools and think about the benefits. If students walk to school, yes, the district saves money on transportation costs. 2, students get exercise. They're out every day. And they may have better attendance. If they can't oversleep and miss the bus, they just may walk to school late. And in many cases, they may be more motivated to wake up and leave for school with their neighbor or friend. This is a huge one. Everyone will have a greater sense of pride and community in their neighborhood if kids are walking to school. Another important point is that with neighborhood schools, families can make it to PTO, PTA, open houses, parent-teacher conference nights. There are many kids whose parents don't have cars, and they attend a school several neighborhoods over, and it's impractical to take a bus to any after-school meeting or even to go to a concert during the middle of the day. Finally, and this is I'm as a high school teacher, I've experienced this. No kid wants to stay after in Mr. Conroe's class for help if that means they're going to miss their bus and it'll be an additional 2 hours to get home, to stay for 15 minutes to ask me a question. But if a high school kid walks home, they're more than happy to stay for a few more minutes, ask a teacher a question, or hang out with their friends. So to me, there are a handful of benefits to going to a neighborhood schools model. So let's just jump into the financials very quickly. Section 3, page 23 of the draft budget. You can see from last year and this year, transportation is essentially an $80 million expenditure. Contract transportation is specifically the first student yellow buses and the RTS buses that transport high school kids. And it's important to note, I've heard this argument from board members and from other parents that, well, New York State pays for up to 90% of approved transportation expenses for every district. So it doesn't matter how big the transportation budget is, the state pays for 90% of it. Well, 10% of 80 million is 8 million. We, the district, is on the hook for $8 million. And let's say we could cut $3 million of that every year. A $3 million savings is significant. I did want to just show very quickly that the difference between total and contract, sports, field trips, those are other transportation expenses, clubs, things that, events after school. I believe there are some special ed services also included in that other transportation line. So I want to talk about that state aid and the 1.5 mile rule. So if you live further than 1.5 miles, and this is for any district, the state will pick up the transportation tab for that. If you live closer and you are a student with a disability, the state will also pick that up. So what that means is, in the city, if you live within 1.5 miles of your school, you don't get a bus. So I lived that when I was in middle school at Douglas Middle School, 7th and 8th grade, I was one street away from being in the cutoff. So I had to get myself to school. There were a bunch of kids in the neighborhood who were in the same circumstances. We carpooled together, all the parents did, and we walked home every afternoon, 1.5 miles, about 30 minutes. For middle schoolers, that was fine. But for some families, they know that if they choose a school 1.5 miles or further away, they get door-to-door bus pickup and delivery. That is terribly convenient for those families, but it does nothing for the education of their child. And especially in a tight budget season, we can't afford luxuries at the expense of the mission of the district, which is to educate the child. And not for nothing, but city neighborhoods are designed for walking. But we've created a culture where kids don't walk to school. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. As fewer and fewer kids walk to school, parents see it as an isolated experience. But if we kind of turn back the clock culturally and we say, you know what? In this district, kids walk to school. As more kids walk from within a neighborhood, parents will be more comfortable with their kids walking to school. So here's a grand compromise that has been proposed before, but let's start doing some of these things. Okay, the 1.5 miles, that's a big limit, especially for elementary school kids. What if the district could show that it could reduce that $80 million transportation cost and still bus pre-K students who live more than 1 mile from school? So change that 1.5 miles to 1 mile for K through 6 students, and work with state and local politicians to still fund at 90%. If you watched my second video, the state picks up the tab for so many other things. Let's try to do this. This is just another way to get even more kids walking and considering neighborhood schools. So this whole school of, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where we could have dozens of kids getting bused to dozens of schools? So this is tied to a decades-old school of choice policy that I think is false advertising. I like to call it school of chance. So this policy gives families a chance to enter a lottery for their child's placement at kindergarten, 7th grade, and 8th grade. So here's how it works. Families have to select 5 RCSD schools that they would like their child to attend, and there's a chance you get your top-ranked school. It really boils down to, there are a certain number of open seats, and if more families choose that school than has open seats, the seats are assigned through a random lottery. That's why I think it's a chance model for many families. Now, there are popular schools that get way more selections than there are seats. And then there are some schools that get hardly any selections at all. So how do those schools that don't get many selections get filled up? Well, to me, this is the worst part of the policy. Families that don't participate, those that choose or can't fill out the paperwork, or if you move to Rochester after the deadline for this policy, those children get sent to schools with open seats. That school might be nearby. It could be 2 miles away. It could be 3.5 miles away. Rather than letting geography dictate where a student goes to school, it's just left open to schools that are undesirable by the families that do participate in the policy. So in the past, we're talking like half of the district families don't participate in this policy. And so those kids just kind of get randomly assigned and assorted to schools throughout the city. So that concludes my video portion on the budget and transportation. But I want you to remember, this is a draft. And just like in school, drafts are meant to be amended and improved. And so the whole point of this sharing of information, and in my point of view, is I want help making this budget work better for RCSD students. I need your help. So here's my call to action. Use your influence. communicate, advise, talk to board members, the superintendent, whomever you have access to make this budget even better. So specifically in this video, I think we need to push toward neighborhood schools. I think in the previous video, we need to request that 5 more grant writers are hired in this budget. And in an earlier video, my second video, I think we need to start lobbying city government for an increase in school aid. It's been nearly 20 years and they're still giving $119 million. I think they should up that by $10 to $15 million per year. And finally, this is the 4th video in the series. Please look back at the earlier ones and look forward to the ones that will be coming out soon. Thank you for listening. Go out and make a difference.